Hoy celebramos un nuevo aniversario, 15 años.
15 años brindando una experiencia de alta exigencia enfocada en la innovación.
15 años fomentando un debate constructivo y de alta calidad.
15 años formando una vibrante comunidad de futuros líderes unidos por el deseo de transformar el ámbito público desde una mirada plural, abierta y participativa.
15 años trabajando para construir ese otro México que está en curso.
Hoy queremos compartir el camino recorrido a lo largo de estos años.
Hoy queremos celebrar los logros como agradecimiento a nuestros aliados y como manifestación de un compromiso renovado con la transformación para el bienestar.
Esta es la Escuela de Gobierno y Transformación Pública del Tecnológico de Monterrey.
Muy buenos días. Espero que le estén pasando muy bien esta mañana, sin duda yo lo estoy haciendo. Mi nombre es Alejandra Molina, soy parte del equipo de la Escuela de Gobierno y Transformación Pública y me da mucho gusto darle la bienvenida, primero que nada, pues a nuestros alumnos, a nuestros profesores, a nuestros consejeros, a los egresados y sin duda alguna también a agradecerle a nuestros aliados e invitados externos que nos acompañan. Entiendo que revisando un poquito el registro veo que tenemos alumnos de muy distintas carreras. Tenemos abogados, ¿no? Lo vi. Ok, sí tenemos abogados, ingenieros también vi, muy bien, ingenieros, muy bien, vi mercadólogos y comunicólogos por ahí. O sea, lo que me da gusto es que nos acompañen muchísimas carreras. En la Escuela de Gobierno decimos que hay otro México en curso. Creo que mi playera no lo dice completo porque es como que me la fajé y ya todo un problema, pero creemos que hay otro México en curso y la verdad es que qué mejor ejemplo que ver a cada uno de ustedes aquí tan comprometidos ¿no? con esta participación y de verdad se los agradezco enormemente poder compartir con ustedes esto y les pido también que si quieren compartir cómo les va en este evento, que tengamos un poquito de diálogo en redes sociales, lo hagamos con el hashtag Año de Transformación y hashtag Hay Otro México en Curso. Y nosotros, por supuesto, vamos a estar documentando también un poquito, entonces me dará mucho gusto ver sus impresiones en redes sociales. Y bueno, la Escuela de Gobierno y Transformación Pública se fundó hace 15 años, justamente por eso andamos en esta celebración. Cumplimos 15 años y se fundó por el compromiso del Tecnológico de Monterrey de formar a los mejores perfiles para hacer de México y del mundo un lugar más próspero, más justo, más transparente, más democrático y sin duda alguna más incluyente. Y alguien que nos ha ayudado día con día a mantener ese compromiso vivo es Víctor Gutiérrez Aladro, que es el vicepresidente de la región norte. Y yo te pediría, Víctor, si nos puedes dar unas palabras.
Claro, buenos días. Gracias, Alejandra. Buenos días, ¿cómo están? Bueno, pues es un gusto tenerlos a todos ustedes aquí el día de hoy. Como ya lo comentó Alejandra, tenemos estudiantes, profesoras, profesores, nuestros consejeros, directivos y muchos invitados que están aquí compartiendo con nosotros hoy este día. Y sobre todo, bueno, dentro del marco, como ustedes saben, además de que la Escuela de Gobierno y Transformación Pública está cumpliendo 15 años, bueno, el marco global de esto es que el Tecnológico cumple 75 años este año. El Tecnológico estamos muy contentos porque hoy, pues después de que en 1943 un grupo de empresarios regiomontanos cuyo líder, don Eugenio Garza Sada, en aquel entonces, pues tuvieron un sueño de crear una institución que tuviera presencia indudablemente en todo el país. En aquel entonces, en 1943, el TEC de Monterrey comenzó en una casa en el centro de la ciudad con 350 alumnos y hoy pues nos da una gran emoción que somos una institución de más de 92,000 alumnos y alumnas en todo el país, cerca de 300,000 exalumnos ya se han graduado de nuestras aulas, tanto en las carreras como en las maestrías, los doctorados, y bueno, la presencia sin duda que hoy tiene el Tecnológico, no solo a nivel nacional, sino a nivel internacional, pues sin duda ya es una institución de gran prestigio y de gran presencia, y sobre todo una institución de la comunidad. Somos una institución de la sociedad que ha permitido pues lograr realmente muchos factores de éxito que nos hacen sentir muy orgullosos. Además, como decíamos, bueno, pues la celebración de estos 15 años de la Escuela de Gobierno y Transformación Pública, en los que unidos hemos dado un rostro renovado a nuestros intereses comunes de generar herramientas de alto valor para la solución de los problemas y retos del ámbito público más relevantes. Estamos conscientes que la transformación pública la creamos todos, la academia, el gobierno, los emprendedores, los medios, las empresas y la sociedad civil. Por eso el TEC decidió hace 15 años crear un espacio para que las ideas converjan y generen bienestar y valor público. En este tiempo nos hemos asumido como la casa promotora de emprendedores públicos que utilizan ese conocimiento como motor para transformar a nuestro país. La casa de académicos que con su investigación generan iniciativas de vanguardia. La casa donde los medios encuentran un espacio para participar en la transformación de lo público y finalmente un lugar donde dotamos a funcionarios públicos de herramientas para construir un mejor entorno. Esto se dice muy rápido y se dice muy fácil, pero son 15 años que hemos construido no solo cumpliendo con un propósito universitario, sino también con una responsabilidad social de promover una agenda de cambio en nuestro país. Por ello, con gran orgullo, y ya lo escucharon ustedes decir de Alejandra, decimos que hay otro México en curso y agradecemos a cada una y a cada uno de ustedes que estén aquí hoy para construir día con día junto con nosotros este gran México. Así que muchas felicidades a la Escuela de Gobierno y Transformación Pública, muchas felicidades a ustedes por estar aquí el día de hoy y celebremos juntos los 75 años de nuestro Tecnológico de Monterrey. Bienvenidos.
Muchísimas gracias, Víctor. Y ahora sí, creo que el momento que todos estábamos esperando, le pido al doctor Alejandro Poiré, decano de la Escuela de Ciencias Sociales y Gobierno, que nos acompañe para darle la bienvenida a nuestro invitado de honor, el general David Petraeus, y empezar la plática. Muchas gracias, doctor.
Muchas gracias, Alejandra. Bienvenidos todos, muy buenos días. Me da mucha emoción estar aquí esta mañana en esta conversación con el general David Petraeus, donde vamos a poder hablar de temas extraordinariamente importantes para nuestra comunidad como Tecnológico de Monterrey, para nuestro país y para el mundo. Vamos a hablar de liderazgo, vamos a hablar de estrategia, vamos a hablar del futuro de Norteamérica y de seguridad global. Y tenemos el gran privilegio de celebrar este 15 aniversario de la Escuela de Gobierno y Transformación Pública con la presencia de todos ustedes. Quiero agradecer especialmente a nuestros líderes dentro del Tecnológico de Monterrey por acompañarnos, a nuestros consejeros también por estar aquí esta mañana y a cada una y cada uno de ustedes por el tiempo que le dedican a esta reflexión. David Petraeus es general retirado de los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica, es conocido mundialmente como exdirector de la CIA, fue también el líder de las fuerzas aliadas, tanto en Irak como en Afganistán, sirvió muchos años allá y hoy día ocupa una posición de liderazgo en uno de los think tanks más importantes del mundo, el KKR Global Institute, y este es el think tank de una de las firmas de inversión más grandes a nivel global. Es un líder mundialmente conocido, desde luego por su servicio público a su país, pero particularmente para nosotros es extraordinaria su presencia porque es un amigo y un aliado de México y es un doctor en ciencia política y relaciones internacionales de una escuela como la nuestra, Escuela de Gobierno y Transformación Pública, pero él en la Universidad de Princeton. Su experiencia académica, su experiencia de servicio, su experiencia como un líder en el ámbito económico y financiero es invaluable para nosotros. Y estoy además muy agradecido, and I'm very happy to have you here, my dear friend, because he's a personal friend of mine. We've worked together, and we're really incredibly happy to have you today with us. Thank you very much. Please come around.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Bienvenido. Nuestra conferencia va a ser en inglés. A la hora de las preguntas y respuestas pueden ustedes preguntar en inglés o en español. Él tiene traducción simultánea, but our conversation will be in English. Thank you very much, General. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's great to be on stage with you again, having done this in Mexico City. And thanks for the kind introduction. As you mentioned, I am a product of a school like this, the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University. I might add, though, it was not just political science and international relations, it was that other very important discipline, economics.
I'm glad you were paying attention, General. I'm sorry for not having mentioned it before.
As we mentioned, one without the other is at a tremendous loss. And it's really, I think, the interdisciplinary nature of a school like the Graduate School of Government that you've played such a significant role in here at Tech. And that is the key. Again, having all of those together. And I think particularly important at a time like this for Mexico, a time of governmental change, when my hope is that the incoming government will recognize the importance and the value of having individuals that have studied this academically, who have been led by those who not only achieved great academic excellence, such as you with a PhD at Harvard. By the way, another school, the Kennedy School of Government, where I'm a senior fellow, and in fact, I'm a professor as well at the University of Southern California, 1 week a semester in the Price School of Policy and Government. So I am very, very bullish. I'm very enthusiastic about what it is that you're doing here, and it's really been a pleasure to play a role in that. I might also add that I am now the proud possessor of a tech jacket, which has been personalized, as you can see right here as well. But thank you, and it's great to be at the MIT of Mexico.
Thank you very much. You are, of course, a world-known leader, known very well for your service in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also as a director of the CIA.
Where I was privileged to partner with you.
Absolutely,
as a Minister of Interior, and I think it's reasonably well known that there is a very, very close partnership, a very good cooperation between the intelligence community of the United States, the law enforcement community, the military, with the counterparts in Mexico, and you were the point man who brought all of that together, and it was a privilege to do that with you at that time. A lot of the activities that we pursue, of course, we cannot discuss here today, but take it from me, they were significant.
And it was my privilege as well to have a partner like you, but you are now the leader of this incredibly interesting think tank, the chairman of KKR Global Institute. Please let us know a little bit more about what role you're playing now. What is it exactly that you do there?
Well, first of all, KKR, one of the big global financial investment firms, about $191 billion under management around the world, offices in 16 different countries in the world, and I'm privileged to be a partner there as well. I've been the chairman of the KKR Global Institute for over 5 years now. And essentially the idea is to try to help KKR be the wisest, most intelligent, and most informed investor possible, so that when we evaluate a deal, and by the way, I originated the first deal in Mexico, $1.2 billion with Pemex, and we had capital, they had assets, did a swap that I think has been mutually advantageous, and we've done now a total of $2 billion of investment here, one of the leading companies in the United States doing private equity type and credit and capital market investments. So you essentially think of us as having 3 pillars and 3 groups of customers. The pillars are geopolitical risk, macroeconomic analysis, and environmental social governance issues analysis. We believe that it's essential to have very detailed and granular understanding of each of these circumstances as you evaluate a potential investment. And then we provide that information to our investment committees who are making the decision whether or not to invest the money that we're privileged to manage. We help the portfolio companies once we've made investments in them. We go around the world helping them go global, helping them resolve issues in places like the former Yugoslavia or Africa. We made the biggest investment, private equity investment there 3 or 4 years ago. And then we also help our investors, and we do events with them. We do bespoke products and analyses and macroeconomic studies and so forth for them on a regular basis. And again, all part of just trying to be as intelligent as we can when we're allocating resources. And by the way, we also bring in essentially our own McKinsey internal group of 65 or so former senior executives with expertise in everything from supply chain to IT to human resources and so forth to logistics. And they also work, and we even have now a new element that is called the Chief of Technology, and what they're trying to do is identify how technology might disrupt existing investments. In other words, what will digital banking do to our investment in the biggest credit card processor in the United States, which is a huge investment for us. And we're constantly looking over the hill, if you will, to identify what technology is going to emerge, how would that affect investments we're examining, where should we be seeking to invest in the future as well. It's a little bit like being the director of the CIA, but for a financial firm rather than for the national security team, and with a lot smaller staff. But with some other advantages, shall we say.
You have been all over the world. In your current position, you meet with business leaders worldwide, you meet with political leaders worldwide. You have done that for a number of years, and in the military field, in the political field, in the economic field. And when you think about what the world currently needs, even the World Economic Forum has said we need leaders. We're in lack of leaders. Where have you seen these leaders flourish? What does it take? Where are they, if there are any, that we can think of as leaders that are actually making us optimistic about the future?
Oh, certainly there are some great leaders out there, and leaders of countries, governments, leaders of business firms, transformative leaders. We all know what Jeff Bezos has done. We know what Jack Ma in China has done. We know what Prime Minister Abe has done to turn around with Abenomics, the Japanese economy that had been flat for 20 years. Prime Minister Modi, the Modi moment in India. Arguably Chancellor Merkel, President Macron, ideally President Piñera in Chile, back for his second opportunity there. Hopefully President Duque in Colombia. Again, there are, and many others, by the way, that I might add. But essentially, I think what you need to do is step back and ask, what are the tasks of a strategic leader? And then determine whether or not these individuals can actually perform those tasks. And those who are successful, Reed Hastings of Netflix, I'll give you an example of how Netflix has actually demonstrated extraordinary success in performing these 4 tasks of a strategic leader, and I've discussed these tasks with him, I might add. But the first task is to get the big ideas right, and this is the strategy. What is it that we are going to do? What are the animating ideas? And by the way, a strategic leader is someone who truly sets the azimuth, determines the strategy. The commander in the surge in Iraq, where the surge that mattered most was not the surge of forces, it was the surge of ideas. It was the complete transformation of what we were doing by 180 degrees. To give you an example, instead of consolidating our forces on big bases and handing it all off to the Iraqis, we realized that we had to get back into the neighborhoods, that we had to live with the people if we were to secure and serve them, and that was our primary mission. And we had to take control back from the Iraqis because the violence had escalated to such a point that they could no longer handle it. You've got to get the big ideas right. For what it's worth, for me, this has generally been a process that it ideally should be transparent, it should be inclusive, everyone should be inside the tent contributing rather than what people do when they're outside the tent and excluded. And it generally is iterative. I'm not one, at least, who has been able to find the tree under which you sit and you get hit on the head by Newton's apple fully formed. I generally don't have eureka moments. I have little moments, and then you get hit on the head by a seed of a big idea, and then you have to shape it through this iterative process. But you've got to get the big ideas right. Then, if you're lucky enough to do that, by the way, if you don't do that, the entire foundation for what you're doing subsequently is shaky. The next task is to communicate the big ideas. Now, that's not hard throughout the breadth and depth of an organization if it's a startup and all the members of the firm can fit inside the conference room, as a number of startups in which I'm invested do from time to time. But it gets very difficult if you're commanding 165,000 American men and women in uniform, plus another 170,000 contractors and another 25 or so thousand coalition forces, and then partners that number in the hundreds of thousands from host nation security elements. This is a challenge, and you've got to make sure that the big ideas at your level are translated into real activities at the level of the individual who is putting on a Kevlar helmet and body armor and a weapon and going outside the wire, never knowing if they're going to be greeted by a hand grenade or a handshake, but having to respond properly to either. So that's a big task right there. Then third, you've got to oversee the implementation of the big ideas. You have to determine, how do you spend your own time? What is your battle rhythm? What do you do every single day of the week? And in combat, we did it every single day. There were no days off, there were no weekends. It was 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, or sometimes more. How did I spend my own time? We had a huge matrix that showed how we did that. A couple of times a week, every day a week, once a week, once every other week, monthly, all the way up to the 6-hour quarterly civil military campaign plan review that the ambassador and I chaired together with all of the other ambassadors and generals in the room. What are the metrics? How do you know if you're winning or losing? Do you have confidence in the numbers? Have you really ratcheted them down? And do you have true, clear definitions for them and a process to determine what is the accurate information? And then finally, a task that is often overlooked, the fourth task, is to have formal processes where you and others sit down and determine how you need to refine the big ideas and do it again and again and again, because you cannot continue to rest on one set of big ideas. Think about Kodak, which really had almost cornered the market on photography, on film, cameras, and so forth. And unbeknown to many people, they had thousands of patents on digital photography, but they didn't move quickly enough, and they got passed. And Kodak is a bankrupt, essentially. It's a shadow of what it used to be because other firms seized the initiative and got the high ground in digital photography before they did. America Online, the biggest of the big ideas in the early days of internet service provision, that Americans will pay for dial-up access to the internet, which was hugely important right up until it wasn't, when Google decided we'll give away access to the internet as long as we can use the data that we glean from it and we can monetize that. Netflix, I promised very quickly to tell you about that because Reed Hastings is one of the great entrepreneurial leaders in the world. He started out, small firm. They said, let's look at how much it cost Blockbuster to have brick and mortar shops in which they rent videos and CDs of movies. They said, we're going to avoid the brick and mortar. We're going to put Blockbuster out of business because we're going to mail CDs directly to our customers. And so that's the big idea, communicates it, figures out how to implement it, gets down here a couple of years later, and they said, man, that's turned out great. Blockbuster is literally going out of business. By the way, there is one Blockbuster left. It is in Portland, Oregon. It's hanging in there by its fingernails. I think it's more a tourist attraction than a movie rental. Then the next big idea, okay, we're going to now stream content. You can now download content because internet speeds have picked up so much with broadband. So that's the new model because others were also doing what they were here. They worked their way through that. They get down here 2 years later and said, well, this is awesome. We're bigger than ever. But now other people are also offering content that can be downloaded. So what do we do now? They bet $100 million on House of Cards. They created content and many other productions as well. Revolutionary stuff, blossomed in size. And of course, they're going global at this point in time now as well. Work that through, and again, tremendous increase. Fourth big idea, blockbuster movies, real productions. The first one I was a bit disappointed in because it was a movie about a very close friend and colleague of mine, General Stan McChrystal, had Brad Pitt playing him. It was very wooden. It was not very effective. Stan McChrystal has a great sense of humor, very flexible. I was also frankly disappointed that Brad Pitt didn't play me. I had the individual who was the gladiator played me in my little part in that movie. But again, it's actually turned out to be very good, and we're all waiting now to see what will the new big idea be. Will it be, I don't know, virtual reality? Who knows? But I guarantee you that Reed Hastings is going to come up with yet another great big idea because he's literally adhered to this model, including, very importantly, formal processes where they sit down and brainstorm and try to figure out what should the refinements to the big ideas be. That's what leaders need to bring. I believe that schools like this tend to equip people with at least the academic attributes and skills and knowledge that can enable them to carry out that kind of process. And you know, whether you adopt that particular intellectual architecture for what strategic leaders do or not, I think those tasks are critical. And having people that can lead the performance of those tasks is what really determines the success or the failure of those who are given great and extraordinary opportunities to actually lead at that level.
And as a leader of these massive organizations, as companies, military companies in different locations, but also the CIA, I'm sure you have also some ideas about how is it that you actually develop these skills amongst your troops, amongst your rank and file. I mean, we do a bit of it. I'd say we are probably the most committed institution in Mexico and in a number of countries to develop these entrepreneurial skills and leadership skills, and we are constantly thinking about that, but any advice from you would help us.
I've actually thought about this a great deal, in part because the militaries of the world, not just the United States, but all around the world, are arguably the best at formal leader development. They're really committed to the training at every level. You know, a commissioned officer, for example, first has to go through entry level, a military academy, which often is also a college like the U.S. Military Academy. Then even after you graduate from that, you go to a basic course for your particular branch within, say, the Army. Then you have some specialty courses. Then you go to a unit for several years. Then you go to a 6-month advanced course. Then you command a company and do some staff time. Then you go to an academic year for the staff college, if you're lucky. 4 so more years, and you get to go to a war college, another full academic year. If you're lucky, then you command a brigade. Maybe you get promoted, struck by lightning, promoted to 1-star general, and there's even another course there for 6 weeks. By the way, during which my course, I chose to come to Mexico, among other. You get to do a world trip as well, and we had a great time. I took the North and South American trip during that time. But this is an extraordinary developmental process. And the truth is that no other institution of which I'm aware can actually afford to do that. They don't have the people, the spare people allocated to do that. The CIA, there's no way that we could do that. We had far more missions than we had people, especially on the operations side, the clandestine service side, as it's termed. And it was hard even to break someone out for a single year to attend an initiative that I started, a fellowship up at Harvard for a year, to give them an out of your intellectual comfort zone experience. But certainly the formal component of this is hugely important, the education, and I think that's what a school like this does indeed fulfill. But there are 2 other major components, I think, to the development of leaders. The second is actual experience. It's performing leadership tasks. It's performing at the right hand of leaders. I was privileged to serve as the aide to a 2-star general for whom I worked subsequently 2 more times when he was a 4-star, including U.S. Southern Command based in Panama, then also Supreme Headquarters Allied Power Europe. He was the NATO commander. I was the aide to the Chief of Staff of the Army for 2 years, the executive officer, the Chief of Staff, if you will, for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, our highest senior military officer for 2 years. These are incredible positions, in addition to being a company commander, battalion commander, airborne brigade commander, airborne division commander, 3-star commander, 4-star commander, and even then a theater commander of all of U.S. Central Command, from Egypt to Pakistan, Kazakhstan to Yemen and the pirate-infested waters off Somalia. We were very proud to have 90% of the world's problem at that time. But these experiences, both watching and helping others, and then doing it yourself, obviously hugely valuable, and you learn a great deal. But then there's another component that is sometimes overlooked, and that is self-study. This is reading about others who have done what you're doing before you. And it's not just reading about, the MacArthurs and the Eisenhowers of the world. It's reading about, the second lieutenants of the world in combat, in whatever. I think that's very important. And I did a great deal of time reading biographies of not just the great military leaders, but great statesmen, great scholars, and fascinated by that, and tried to learn from that, and tried to distill lessons as well for myself, writing down this whole concept of strategic leadership, writing down what might be termed tactics, and techniques of leadership. The idea that, for example, leadership style, you shouldn't have just one leadership style. You should have a leadership style for each person who reports directly to you, because each of us responds differently. Each of us needs a different context to bring out the best in each of us, to let, Alejandro probably did need a pat on the back even once a year to keep highly motivated and energized and driving on. I might need a pat on the back once an hour, or maybe even an application of a boot to a particular part of my body. But you have to understand that, and then you have to understand that every organization collectively requires a different style. Needless to say, the style that's employed as the commander of a coalition of 60 some odd nations in Afghanistan in tough combat is very different from that required, let's say, as a rifle platoon leader, an airborne rifle platoon leader, as I was privileged to be as a second lieutenant, or as the director of the CIA. So all of these are slightly different structures with slightly different elements within them. Each of those elements often requires a different leadership style, and I think it's very important to understand that and not think that there's one leadership style, firm but fair, or whatever it may be, is going to be adequate to bring out the best in each we're privileged to lead. Very important, I think, again, to try to constantly analyze that, study that, see the strengths and the weaknesses of others, because we all have strengths and weaknesses. We all go through ups and downs, see how people respond to adversity, and so forth. And I think that's what ultimately, all together, because I think everything in life, by the way, is a multifactorial or a multilateral equation. There are very few issues that are resolved by a single action in a single area. Usually it's multiple actions. And in fact, we've talked about how do you deal with security challenges in Mexico. And we've agreed, and we've worked on these in the past, that it has to be a comprehensive campaign. It can't just be police or just Army or Navy special operations or even just security forces. It has to be all of those. And by the way, I think what happened in Monterrey starting about, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, maybe even 8 years ago, what was done here is a model for the rest of Mexico. And I've actually offered that to 2 presidents in a row and even to some leaders who are going to be leading the country here in the future to figure out what was done here. How did they make the police so much better? How did they improve the judicial and the prison legs of the 3 legs of the rule of law stool? And then more importantly, all the other components of this, the political component, basic services, education, jobs, healthcare, all of that has to come together if you're to deal with the discontent and the other issues that ultimately feed criminal activity and produce what is essentially a criminal or even a financial insurgency. And it has to be dealt with comprehensively. There's no silver bullet, as we say, and that's hard, and it's difficult to frame even the big ideas, much less develop the capabilities to deal with them.
Areas which I think are currently in need of big ideas, or at least some of the big ideas that we were working with as assumptions for the last 40 or 50 years, maybe even, are being challenged, in particular by the current administration of the United States, but not just the United States. Brexit is another example of this. But when we think about the Paris Accord, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, and maybe even the approach of the United States administration to NATO and the G7, this big ideas seem to be challenged these days. What would you say are the most, first of all, do you see a big shift? And if so, what would you say are the big shift, the implications of this shift?
Well, I think to take this up to a strategic level before, say, focusing on the US administration or some other country, what you see is a manifestation of domestic populism. What we have is there's a significant part of populations of some major countries that have a variety of grievances, dissatisfaction, sense of alienation, losing control of their country, whatever it may be. This is not unique, by the way. I mean, the U.S., for example, we're all immigrants in the U.S., but once we've gotten to the U.S., we always wanted to hold off the next group of immigrants. I mean, it's just been cycle after cycle. But it's a bit more pronounced, perhaps, this time. But you have seen this. You noted that Brexit, by and large, was a result of a degree of populism. Certainly, what took place in the United States was a degree of populism. And again, there's something real there that Donald Trump has touched. Let's not think this is just, the creature of social media or something like this. There are real issues, especially in the heartland of the United States. Look what happened in Italy, where a country that was always ruled by a coalition that was sort of center-right or center-left or a combination of those, all of a sudden has this very uneasy coalition of left and right, and they only agree on one issue, and that is no more immigrants. It's the same that has animated politics in Hungary, to a degree in Austria, to a degree, lesser degree, Poland, or some other issues. But you see this manifest in many, many different countries. You saw it in Germany. Yes, Chancellor Merkel did get a fourth term, but it was very, very close. She had a very tough time forming a government, given how well Germany's doing, a fiscal surplus, leading the world in innovation in a variety of areas of manufacturing, very good education, jobs training, services, everything else. But she committed to take 1 million refugees, and that caused a huge populist reaction, and indeed gave fuel to an ultra-nationalist right-wing party that had never even, I don't think, had any real power in the Bundestag, and now is a player in politics. So you do see this, and again, you have to look, clearly the election of López Obrador was a reaction of populism. I mean, the two main parties were rejected, essentially. Dissatisfaction, in particular, I think, looking from the outside, but talking with folks here, that dissatisfaction with corruption and with instability, lack of security. And so this is what is out there, and I think you have to be very clear-eyed about it, you have to be realistic about it, you have to acknowledge that there are concerns like that. In the United States, as in Mexico, the disparity of wealth, these kinds of issues have to be addressed. And I think that's what's given rise to an essentially non-traditional political leaders. I mean, Donald Trump had never run for an office before in his life. He was actually a Democrat before he was a Republican. His views have evolved considerably, to put it charitably. And yet he's tapped into something, and we should be very clear-eyed about that.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that the future of these populist movements, in particular, for example, the implications of that for multinational cooperation, do you think that will actually, is it actually reshaping these institutions?
Well, clearly it's having an effect. I think you identified the 3 areas that are the most significant changes with respect to U.S. policy, and that is climate, withdrawing from Paris, and a number of other, turning back a number of the regulations and decisions in the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. Certainly on immigration, very significant changes there as well. And then on trade, again, favoring bilateral trade agreements rather than multilateral, pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You can indeed ask whether there is coherence to this, because if you're going to take on China with a lot of tariffs and essentially a trade war, perhaps you would want the rest of the world with you, and you might want to have the EU in your corner and the G7 and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the other 11 that have actually gone ahead and done TPP. But again, let's recognize that there is reality to the fact that China has had non-tariff trade barriers, has stolen intellectual property, has forced transfer of very important intellectual property with investments in China, noting that it has done extraordinarily well, unprecedentedly well in its economic growth, noting the paradox that China is not only the most important, in a sense, strategic competitor for the U.S., but also our #1 trading partner, depending on the price of Canadian oil on a given day, noting that Mexico and Canada are the other 2 of the top 3. So there are changes. I don't know whether these will be sustained, though. We will see. Because the real one that actually gives me pause is if the United States steps back from its traditional leadership since the end of World War II of what is called the rules-based international order. And in particular, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, after it was clear that the US and the West had won, that we had prevailed in a sense, our system had won, our system of democracy and free market economics, capitalist economics. But that's being challenged now as well. China is a different model, and again, there are aspects of that you may admire, aspects that you may not like, but it is a different model, and others will be attracted to it because of the extraordinary achievements that they've had. So will the U.S. continue to lead? That is a significant question that really is being debated in the United States and in other countries as well. I hope that at the end of the debate, the conclusion will be that yes, it is a burden to some degree to lead the rules-based international order, but frankly, it has been awfully good for not just us, but for our allies and partners around the world, the same as NAFTA has been. Yes, there are winners and losers with trade agreements, and yes, political figures don't always recognize the losers in the way that they might and compensate them and support them. You know, if you're, for example, in the shoe industry in the United States or the clothing industry with NAFTA, and many of those jobs shifted south, but it is better for the broad population, and it has propelled North America very impressively. So again, we are at probably, I don't know, a hinge point, a pivotal moment in international relations. My hope, again, is that having seen what is being offered, that we will refine that will change the big ideas. They'll not be entirely what they were before, but they will be sharpened and improved.
To a certain extent, the world has has been challenged, world peace, world order, by nationalist, populist leaders in the past, and more recently, of course, by different types of terrorist movements. But there are new tools available, in particular to the latter, to the terrorist movements, in particular cybersecurity.
Yes, yeah.
And it has been said that the next 9/11 is likely to be in cybersecurity. You are perhaps at a very privileged position to comment on that.
Well, and I've actually offered that, you know, people ask you what keeps you awake at night as a former general and former CIA director, and the answer is really nothing. I mean, if I learned how to sleep in a combat zone, I can sure sleep as a civilian without any real significant responsibility. But actually what could keep me awake at night is the prospect of a cyber equivalent of a weapon of mass destruction, say shutting down the electrical grid of the eastern seaboard. And we know, it's publicly been acknowledged that the intelligence or cyber services of a number of the major countries in the world have been conducting cyber reconnaissance inside our electrical grid and inside the electrical grid of other countries. It's well known that the Russians shut down the electrical grid of eastern Ukraine for a period of time, perhaps just to test a dry run to see how that might work. We don't know entirely what was left behind. We know that there are vulnerabilities. We know that the Director of National Intelligence in the US has said that the warning lights are blinking red on this particular issue. So yes, this is a significant concern. And it's one, again, that I think ranks right up there with when people ask me to rank the threats, let's say, to the national security of the United States, perhaps to that of the Western world. Number one would be revisionist powers, countries that are not happy with the status quo. It would be Russia, North Korea, Iran, and in certain respects, China. Number two would be Islamist extremists. This is going to be a generational struggle. We may defeat them here, defeat them there, but we'll see it's going to ebb and flow, and we have to stay on that particular threat. Number three actually is cyber threats, in my view. It's nation-state cyber threats, it's criminal cyber threats, which are ever more diabolically creative, and I'm actually on the board of the largest pure-play cybersecurity services integration firm in the world, Optiv, a KKR company, and we're obviously riveted on this. And then actually it's domestic populism, and it is indeed strain and stress on the rules-based international order that is unique at levels unique since the end of the Cold War. And then perhaps on a bad day in Washington, it might actually be hyper-partisanship in my nation's capital.
Well, that's a very good summary of the things that should keep others awake at night. The lights are a little bit up, which means that I have to give the floor to our audience. Como le vamos a hacer, cómo va a funcionar esta sesión de preguntas y respuestas, les pido que levanten la mano y se preparen para cachar el micrófono. porque ya pasó alguna vez que les puede caer en la cabeza y se pueden lastimar. Entonces, ¿quién quiere hacer la primera pregunta? Las preguntas pueden ser en inglés o en español. Mira, aquí si te levantas tantito, te la aviento. Con suerte lo cachamos y no le pega a nadie más. Cuando termines tu pregunta, se lo das a alguna de las personas que traen la camisa de Hay Otro México en Curso para que se lo pase a la siguiente persona. Muchas gracias. Pregunta breve, por favor, para que tengamos más tiempo de escuchar a otros.
¿Literalmente es un micrófono?
¿Al micrófono?
Ah,
sí,
okay.
señor.
Well, just a short question. I'm a lawyer. I'm interested. I have the sorry. I want to study national security in the future, and that's why I want to ask your opinion on Caspar Weinberger's book, The Next War. Thank you very much.
Bien, se lo das el micrófono a alguien que tenga la... Gracias.
I have to confess that I am not familiar with the late Caspar Weinberger's last book, The Next War, I'm afraid. Can you give me 2 quick issues that it summarizes, that it presents? I'm very familiar with Weinberger's rules that supposedly should govern intervention, which I argued as a young captain when he was the Secretary of Defense, were somewhat unrealistic, to put it mildly. And that if you actually adhered to his rules, you would never do anything with this great Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps that we were building in the United States. Not that I'm an ardent interventionist, but please.
Yes, that book. Perdón.
Si te sientes más cómodo en español, pues dilo en español, él tiene traducción.
El libro básicamente toca temas de seguridad nacional de Estados Unidos y menciona ciertos países que podrían ser próximamente generar conflictos bélicos entre Estados Unidos y dichos países. Y ese libro es importante porque uno de los países que se menciona es México, precisamente. Por eso quería conocer su docta opinión sobre este libro.
Gracias.
Look, my view has long been that Mexico and the United States, even though we had a history that was more contentious than cooperative for many decades, but for the last 2 or even a bit longer than 2 decades, certainly, has been one of cooperation rather than competition, and I think that's what it should continue to be. I might add to that, just to give you some context. It's well known that President-elect Trump invited me to Trump Tower, and I had my celebrity apprentice moment, if you will, and went in and sat down to discuss potentially being his Secretary of State. He had a list of questions, clearly that he was trying to determine if I could turn campaign slogans into policies. I had a list of issues that I needed to be convinced we were sufficiently compatible, such as international trade and some other areas, to be able to serve credibly for him as a Secretary of State. And it seemed to go really well, by the way. I got a very positive tweet out of it, which is the ultimate sign. Ultimately, of course, he discovered Rex Tillerson, and the rest is history. But one of the issues he raised, he said, so General, should we build a wall? And I said, sure, we should build a wall, President-elect, where we don't have a wall, because we already have, 1,500 miles of wall, where it would actually be useful, but only if and only it is part of a comprehensive effort to secure the border, which would include even closer cooperation with our Mexican neighbors. And again, I mentioned there is collaboration and cooperation that is hugely important, and I was very heartened to see announced just yesterday that the Drug Enforcement Agency of the U.S. is going to work with Mexican partners with a headquarters out of Chicago, Illinois, again, to ensure better information sharing, joint intelligence gathering, and a lot of the same stuff that candidly we did when Mexico was privileged to have Alejandro Poire as its Minister of Interior. So I don't see Mexico as a, quote, threat. I don't see Mexico invading the United States. I see Mexico. Look, I taught a course that was titled, for 3.5 years, it was titled The North American Decades. And it was all about the extraordinary integration of our economies, our supply chains during, at that time, 20 years of NAFTA. I was co-chairman of a Council on Foreign Relations task force on North America. I dreamed up that topic. I did a presentation at a monograph at Harvard as a senior fellow that was titled The Great New Emerging Economy, North America. So I obviously am a believer in North American integration, cooperation, and working together, not in confrontation.
Adelante.
I don't know if I had to stand up or not. General Petraeus, right now you were mentioning a couple of threats that the Western world is facing. Nonetheless, given your strategic standpoint from being a fellow at the KKR Institute and being an ex-director of the Central Intelligence Agency, I would like to know, in your opinion, what is the greatest threat that my generation will face worldwide as a humanity at the current time on a basis of the macro tendencies around the world? Is it going to be resource contention? Is it going to be the lack of water? Is it going to be these populistic movements? What is it going to be, and how could we fight it?
Of course, you'll remember that I explained that there are no single factor explanations to questions, but certainly there are coefficients in front of the different factors. Clearly, it's going to be a mix of all of those different threats that I mentioned. Domestic populism is one that I think deserves a pretty substantial coefficient in front of it from country to country, noticing that there are some countries where that really is not an issue whatsoever, and other countries where it is a significant issue. And that may actually lead us to another issue. My actual current project up at Harvard as a senior fellow at the Kennedy School is titled The Return of History. And it is a play on an article that was written back in 1989 by Professor Francis Fukuyama that was titled The End of History. And what he was analyzing and arguing was that history, as he described history, which is the evolution of political and economic thought, history was over. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, the fall of the wall, all of this, that, again, our system of democratic selection of governance and free market capitalism had prevailed. Yes, within that, there might be some that have more social democracy and others that have less. There are different flavors, if you will. But at the end of the day, the successful countries all had that as a feature. That is not the case now. I believe we have the return of history. And the history now, the challenge now is with China. And I don't mean this that China's a nefarious actor per se. I just think they have a different form of government. It is obviously a single party government. Yes, it's a lot of meritocracy to advance in that single party, the Communist Party of China. And the party chairman is, of course, the president of the country. This particular president has consolidated power in a way unlike anyone since Chairman Mao. He no longer has term limits. And there are features of that country that are described as Orwellian. Monitoring of social media, the Great Firewall of China that insulates their internet from outside, arguably subversive voices and influences. An economic system that certainly is highly competitive when you look at, again, Alibaba and Baidu and Xiaomi and all these others, led by the way, truly transformative strategic leaders, but controlled in a way still with large state-owned enterprises. That is a different system, and it's doing pretty darn well. China achieved something no other country ever has in history, and that is 2 decades straight of year-on-year double-digit GDP growth. Yes, it was from a low per capita. Yes, they cannot continue to do that as they get bigger and bigger. It becomes harder and harder. But still, the achievements there have been extraordinary. How many folks have been to China, just out of curiosity? I mean, it is phenomenal to see the infrastructure, to see their trains, and then to ride on the America's, quote, high-speed rail from Washington to New York and bump it along. reaching the terrifying speeds of 120 miles an hour every now and then. So there's a lot there. And I think we've got to up our game. If we believe in democracy and free market economics, as I certainly do, and cherish the freedoms that we celebrate that allow us to have dissent in the press and in media and so forth, then I think it's incumbent on those in a room like this, assuming that many of you or most of you believe as I do, we've got to up our game. And we have to show that this system can still produce extraordinary results and still produce a quality of life and of intellectual discussion and so forth and dissent that is respectful of the other side, et cetera, that this can succeed and still continue to show that it is what the historical evolution really is. That's something I think that is worth looking at. And by the way, again, why I like schools like this. Next, please.
¿Quién tiene el micrófono?
Yep.
Adelante.
Is it working? Oh, there we go. My question is there a biography that you would recommend for me to read regarding commanding leadership abilities? Not just leadership abilities, like, oh, be a good leader and stuff like that. Like commanding abilities, a biography or something like that.
Yeah, look, I think I wrote or did an outline for a leadership book. And by the way, the title of the book is pretty revealing about what I think about leadership. The title is Relentless, which is what I believe leadership has to be, but you might try to make it look as if you have a light hand on the reins and the organization is so extraordinary, you just have to give a tweak now and then, even as what you're really doing is riding it, driving it. You drive a campaign, make no mistake about it, and not just in combat. You have to, I note in there that some people have said that leadership is the imposition of one's will on an organization. That's a little bit harder edge than I might want it to be or to say, but there are moments when you have to do that, and there are certainly moments like that in combat. One of the big ideas that I mentioned, which I didn't mention earlier, among the big ideas of the surge, was a recognition that we could not kill or capture our way out of the industrial strength insurgency we were combating in Iraq. You just couldn't kill or capture all of them. We'd been trying that for 4 years, ever more increasingly. Sure, you have to do that with the irreconcilables, with the leaders of al-Qaeda in Iraq, the Sunni insurgent groups, the Iranian-supported Shia militia. But you need to reconcile with as many of the rest. And we ultimately formally reconciled with 103,000, almost all young men, of Iraq. But when I first announced that, many of the brigade, the battalion commanders said, "General, are you kidding me? We're going to sit down across the table from people who have our blood on their hands?" And I said, "Yep, that's what we're going to do, because that's how these things end." But it took a degree of, again, we are going to do this. This is not optional. But then certainly you have to persuade them of the wisdom of your logic. By the way, a leader does have to have the self-awareness to recognize that if a fair amount of those that he's privileged to lead are questioning what it is that he or she is saying, that maybe the problem is actually you. It might be that the big idea is not as powerful as you thought it was. So I think, again, these are all the dynamics that you have to understand, I think, to be an effective strategic leader. But by the way, life is not just about strategic leaders. Life is about all the other leaders in an organization as well, who have to understand what are the big ideas at the strategic leadership level, but then have to translate them into action at their level, and have to inspire and energize and guide and mentor and encourage, sometimes push those that they are privileged to lead. And even those who don't have a title, such as chief executive officer or battalion commander or chairman or what have you, they are still leaders because people follow their lead. They take their direction. They take the example, the energy, what have you, from those individuals, and you have to be conscious of that too. When I was a staff officer, let's say, instead of a commander, but with a large staff of sometimes hundreds of people, you have to be very cognizant you are still a leader, even if your formal title may not include that in it. Next.
Buenas tardes. Soy profesor de arte en esta institución. Estudio mucho la historia bélica de Estados Unidos desde el cine. Por ejemplo, desde Little Big Horn con Dustin Hoffman hasta Pecados de Guerra con Michael J. Fox. Mi pregunta es, y pensando un poco en Huntington, en choque de civilizaciones, yo creo que si hay un choque de civilizaciones, en nuestra cultura hay una lucha que es la defensa del individuo. En las películas que le menciono, los individuos ahí presentes se pelean entre una visión irreflexiva, un soldado con una visión irreflexiva y alguien con una visión un poco más humanística. Mi pregunta tiene pues, dos filos. La primera, me intriga muchísimo cuál es la formación humanística en los miembros del ejército de Estados Unidos. Y número dos, ¿cuál cree usted que debe ser el peso de las artes en una institución como la nuestra? Gracias.
First of all, let me just point out that, first of all, I knew Sam Huntington. I had enormous respect for him. If you look at Sam Huntington, a great Harvard professor, almost every book he wrote established a new paradigm for the particular, whether it was on development, The Soldier and the State was all about civil-military relations, The Clash of Civilizations, which you mentioned, but there are many others as well. Every single one that he wrote, again, featured that kind of truly profoundly defining thinking on a particular field, and these are still classics in each of those fields. Beyond that, as the professors here are profoundly aware, he influenced in generations of individuals like Richard Betts and Elliot Cohen. In fact, they even showed their respect for him by having their dissertations. Soldier in the State was his dissertation. Imagine, it became the classic work, again, on civil-military relations. They managed to parrot those words to a degree. So Dick Betts wrote Soldier, Statesman, Cold War Crises. Elliot Cohen had, again, Soldier and State in his title as well. So a truly influential individual intellectually and as an academic leader and mentor and so forth. Having said that, I actually think that the clash of civilizations that is most important now is the clash within a particular civilization. It is within the Muslim world. And by the way, that is an existential struggle, because if extremists win, if they take over the two holy mosques, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, if they take over a prominent state, this was the fear where ISIS established an actual caliphate for the first time, actually ruled portions of Syria and Iraq in an extremely barbaric, extreme way, but did manage to attract a very tiny percentage of a very large population in the world to go there and to serve with them. It seemed some kind of ideal of the practice of ultra-conservative Islam. So this is why I have argued that we should not only have coalitions when we combat groups like the Islamic State, but we should also have Muslim countries. In fact, if we criticize Muslim hate speech, I wrote in the Washington Post, is counterproductive. We should want to get them in this, while certainly recognizing there are certain features perhaps of that religion that can be taken to excess, as can certain features of other religions, and have over the millennia, if you look at that history. When it comes to a humanist form or reflection in warfare, look, I think, you know, one of the objectives that I sought to convey to those I was privileged to lead in Iraq and Afghanistan is what I stated earlier. Our primary mission is to secure and serve the people. That's it. Again, if we can't provide security to them, nothing else is possible. And by the way, when I took command, or when I was announced to take command of the surge in Iraq, the situation in the capital of Iraq was so completely out of control that there were 53 dead bodies, civilians, due to violence every 24 hours in the capital of the country. And, you know, then I took command, and it actually, not the civilian violence, but we started fighting back, and then the bad guys fight you for the turf that you're now taking back from them. it got very, very hard. And I remember people from Washington would say, you know, when are you going to start seeing legislation passed by the parliament in Iraq? And I'd say, legislation? We're just trying to create a situation that's safe enough so they can actually walk to work or get their kids to school and back safely. So again, I think that's the ultimate form of a humanist understanding, that we worked very hard to avoid civilian casualties, that there was even a form, the term I found a little bit difficult because I don't want to push it too far, but it was called courageous restraint, that you really, you know, you don't pull that trigger if it's going to endanger civilians, even if it puts you in a little bit of danger at times. Because again, come back to this, the biggest of the big ideas is that we must secure and serve the people, and then everything else falls out from that. You have to live with them to secure them. You can't be on a big base, drive through the neighborhood and go home for dinner and expect the insurgents to stay out of their neighborhood or ever to give up control of it, and so forth. So I think all of that is very significant. And then the role of art, I think, not just in this school, but I think in society. There are all these wonderful quotes that, you know, the world without art is truly lacking in something. There is an aspect to that is very, very profound. It's very profoundly important, and of course, not just art on the wall art, but concerts, symphonies, and all the rest of that, which, by the way, again, this particular city, as far as I can see and understand, has promoted quite effectively. And there are many, in a sense, if you will, monuments to that. I've actually had receptions at I think it's the Museum of Modern Art or whatever the term is, and then at some of the other museums and places that have been created with the help of the city fathers, if you will, the leaders of this great city. Next.
In your article, As Machines Wage War, Human Nature Endures, which was published about a year ago, you talk about the fragmentation of global power and the power that technology is giving to the militaries. You also talk about how cyber capabilities are further blurring the boundaries between wartime and peacetime, and between civilian and military spaces. So what I wanted to ask is, to what extent is it correct to cross the boundaries between private space and national security?
Well, I think there's been a merger in many respects, especially again in cyberspace. And if people ask what are the truly profound developments in recent years in a variety of different arenas, not the least of which is security issues, clearly one of them has been the rise of cyberspace as an entire new domain of warfare, alongside, you know, land, sea, air, space, now cyberspace. And by the way, it's a place where war is ongoing constantly, unlike at land, sea, and air, where we know what war looks like. We know what it is to clash on the ground with armies or navies or air forces. And so this is a truly new arena. And the challenge here is that it's developed so rapidly and it has proliferated. The tools that enable one to be active here have proliferated so more rapidly than, say, nuclear weapons. I mean, if you compare and contrast this with the rise of the nuclear age and the development of thinking on nuclear deterrence and all the rest of this, all these great thoughts that were put together by the so-called wizards of Armageddon, the great nuclear theorists, Brody and Wallstetter and Schelling and so forth, these guys had decades during which there were only 2 countries that had nuclear weapons, and then a couple more, but it was just East versus West. So this really essentially the Soviet Union against the US and 2 other NATO allied countries for the predominant amount of time. And now you have, and by the way, again, decades over which to develop this very detailed thinking and theory. Now you have cyber developments that are just completely outstripping our ability to even think about the implications, much less to actually develop legislation, laws, policies, regulations. We're still trying to come to grips with when should we allow our offensive cyber capabilities to be used against those who are using offensive cyber capabilities on us. How do you respond to Russia when they have meddled so egregiously in our election campaign and heightened the disputes on either side through manipulation of social media and the propagation of untruths and so forth, and actually putting a finger on the scale of those elections too, be very clear about that. And it's developing so rapidly that we're racing to keep up intellectually. And so to come back to the very beginning about how do we get getting the big ideas right, I think we're actually struggling to develop the big ideas in response to what's going on, rather than trying to get ahead and to imagine where this may go, and to have at least intellectual foundations, if not legislation, regulation, policies, to govern and guide what we do. It's a very, very challenging arena.
Well, thank you very much. We have to cut it short, but I'm very happy to hear that you're concerned and interested in cyber and how it influences world governance and security and well-being for everybody, because that's one of the areas where both the School of Engineering here is working, and also our programs, our graduate programs in the School of Government and Public Transformation are starting to develop precisely those areas, and also a new program, a bachelor's degree in Government and Public Transformation, which tries to look exactly at the combination between economics and political science and technological change, and trying to make our students, our graduates, the leaders who are actually going to be able to harness the power of these tools for the improvement of society.
Let me just actually congratulate you, congratulate the dean of this particular great school, the leadership of Monterrey Tech writ large, on all that you have achieved. Over 75 years for the university, but then for the school, 15 years of incredible growth and achievement and development in, again, an interdisciplinary program that I believe is absolutely fundamental to doing governance, social entrepreneurship, and indeed academic inquiry properly. And you have exemplified that every single respect in government, in academia, and indeed as a social entrepreneur before all of that. And I think this great tech school university is extraordinarily fortunate to have you among its leadership, to have you as one of its strategic leaders, and the others who are here. And so really I say that it's been a privilege for me to be part of this, to help celebrate. And again, I will wear this with great pride. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias a todos.
It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure is mine.
This time you will have something made by our artisans.
Fantastic.
It's very beautiful from a specific region of Mexico.
I will display this proudly on my desk at KKR.
So that you don't forget about thorny issues that
thorny
you still
issues
have to
indeed.
tackle.
Oh, these are sharp too. They're very thorny.
Of course, we have a football team.
Oh.
This is a jersey, also from Borregos.
Thank you so much.
That's perfect for your workout.
It is great. I'll wear it. Thank you.
Muchas gracias
Thank
a
you very
todos.
much.
Gracias.
Thank you.